Home Assistant can do a lot, and in this video, we'll be going over how you can take your smart home to the next level with 3 different ways you can integrate Google Home with Home Assistant. We'll first go over how to set up Google Home so that you can control your Home Assistant connected devices with your voice. As someone who was originally against controlling smart home devices with my voice for years, I can honestly say it's so helpful being able to turn lights on and off, or check if a door is left open with just a few quick words. Turn on the kitchen lights. After, we'll go over setting up Home Assistant to be able to interact with Google Home devices, such as playing music, and even having Google Play audible notifications. This means you'll be able to set up Home Assistant automations that can play your favorite music to wake up to every morning, or even have Google warn you when a flood detector senses a possible leak.
A leak has been detected.
We'll also take a look at Home Assistant Cast, which makes the integration even better by allowing us to display images and even Home Assistant dashboards right on Google Home Hubs. Finally, we'll go over setting up Home Assistant to be able to send commands to Google Home as if you were speaking them yourself. This means you'll be able to indirectly add devices into Home Assistant that can normally only be used with Google Home. Let's first take a look at setting up Google Home to be able to control Home Assistant connected devices. This includes all sorts of devices, like lights, curtains, and locks. Before jumping in, take note that you need to have your Home Assistant available over the internet using HTTPS. While I won't be going over how to set that up in this video, it can be accomplished several different ways. You could use Home Assistant Cloud, which has a monthly subscription fee and does help support the Home Assistant project. Or if you want a free option, you can also accomplish this using Cloudflare, DuckDNS, or other services. Depending on how you have Home Assistant exposed to the internet, will determine how you will need to set up this Google Home integration. We'll first go over the integration steps for if you have Home Assistant Cloud set up, and then we will go over how to set this up if you're using other means for internet-facing connectivity. With the assumption that you have remote access working through Home Assistant Cloud, we'll first need to make sure that Google Assistant is enabled on Home Assistant by going to Settings, Voice Assistant, and making sure Google Assistant is enabled. Next, select the Expose tab on the top of the page, and then select one entity you want to have visible to Google. On the window that opens, click the toggle next to Google Assistant. It should turn blue. After closing the window, you should see the Google Assistant logo next to that entity. For now, leave your Home Assistant page open, and then open the Google Home app on your phone. From within the Google Home app, select Devices at the bottom, and then click on Add. On the new screen that opens, select Works with Google, and search for Home Assistant Cloud. A new screen should appear asking if you want to link your Google account to has.io on any device. Click on Continue. You should then be presented with a Home Assistant Cloud login. Here you will enter in your username and password for Home Assistant Cloud, which should be different from what you use to log into Home Assistant locally. After logging in, you'll need to allow access to finish the initial setup. A few moments after authorizing Google access to your Home Assistant, you should be brought back to the Add a New Device page within the Google Home app. If you wait a few more seconds, you should be presented with a new screen for assigning devices to rooms. If you exposed multiple devices in the previous step, they should show here. Otherwise, you should have just the one entity. Going back to Home Assistant, if you are still on the Expose tab for voice assistants, you are able to select multiple devices at once, and then click on the Expose or Unexpose options at the top right-hand side of the screen. Doing so will give a prompt asking if you want to expose or unexpose the entities from all of the voice assistants you currently have enabled. If you expose an entity type that the assistant does not support, you'll be presented with the red exclamation point over the assistant's logo for that entity. Navigating back to the Assistant tab under Voice Assistants, where we originally enabled Google Assistant, you should now see a few options under Google Assistant. The first is Expose New Entities. When enabled, any new supported devices that are not classified as security devices will automatically be exposed to Google Home. If disabled, you'll have to manually expose any new entity added before it will be available in Google Home. The next option is Enable State Reporting. With this option enabled, Home Assistant will send state changes for exposed entities to Google. This is required if you want to see in Google Home when a Home Assistant contact sensor opens or closes, or when a Home Assistant connected light turns on or off. This option is also supposed to speed up voice commands. The last option is labeled Security Devices. Here you can enter in a PIN that would be required to be set or entered when interacting with security devices such as locks or alarm panels. And with that, we have set up Google Home to be able to control Home Assistant connected devices with our voice. Turn on the office lights. A few quick things to keep in mind with this integration. Some devices, like Scene and Script, must first be assigned to an area within Google Home before other members of a shared Google Home household can interact with them. If you recently added new devices to Home Assistant and they are not showing up in Google Home, even though they are exposed, you will want to issue the voice command sync devices to your Google Home. Sync devices. This will have Google refresh the devices with all connected services.
Got it. Syncing devices for 7 providers.
You're also able to limit which entities and domains are allowed to be exposed to Google Home. This can be completed by manually updating your configuration.yaml file. And lastly, Google Home devices are actually able to send their commands locally to Home Assistant, which allows Google to respond faster to voice commands meant for devices that are not considered a secure device. For this to work, Home Assistant must be on the same network and have MDNS discovery working for this to work. Let's now go over how to do the same integration, but if you don't have Home Assistant Cloud. The steps required are going to be a bit more in depth, but the functionality will be the same at the end. First, I recommend opening a notepad file to save a few bits of information that will be used throughout the process, with the first being the external URL to access your Home Assistant. Keep in mind that using this method does still require you to have Home Assistant available over the internet. There are several different ways to set that up for free if you don't want to pay for Home Assistant Cloud. But if you have Home Assistant Cloud, then you can just follow the steps covered in the previous section for Home Assistant device control through Google Home. And if you already followed along with setting up Google Home integration from the previous section, you do not need to follow these next steps, but instead can skip ahead to the following section. Next, open a web page tab and navigate to console.actions.google.com, making sure you are logged into the Google account tied to your Google Home household. Next, click on the blue button labeled New Project. On the new window that opens, give the project a name so that you know it's for Home Assistant. And make sure that the language and country are set correctly for you. Once done, click on Create Project. On the new page, select Smart Home and click on Start Building towards the top of the page. Doing so will start building out your new Google Actions project, which can take several moments. Once completed, you should be redirected to the Overview page for your project, where we will select Name your Smart Home action. Next, enter in a name for this action. This will be used within Google Home, so make sure to give it something meaningful that you will recognize. When done, click on the blue Save button at the top right-hand side of the screen. After you get confirmation that invocation details have been saved, click on Actions on the left-hand menu. Under Fulfillment URL, you'll need to enter in the URL you use to access Home Assistant over the internet. This includes a port number if you use it. If you use port 443, you can leave that out. We will then need to append the URL with the following: /API/Google_Assistant. Next, click on the blue Save button at the top right-hand side of the screen. This action creation process will take a few moments to fully complete. Once you get confirmation that the preview was created successfully, navigate to Account Linking under the menu on the left. On the new page, enter in the following URL under Client ID. It will need to be modified to include your project ID, which can be found in the URL bar in between /project and /smart home account linking. I'll have the URL in the description below for easy copy and paste as well. I recommend adding the project ID to your notepad file for later use. Next, under Client Secret, enter in anything you want. This won't actually get used for what we were doing, so it doesn't matter. Just make sure to not enter in a password you actually use somewhere else. Under Authorization URL, you'll once again enter in your external Home Assistant URL, followed by /auth/authorize. Under Token URL, you'll need to enter in your external Home Assistant URL, followed by /auth/token. Once everything is entered, double check to make sure it's correct, and then click on the blue button labeled Next under the token URL. We'll leave everything unchecked under Step 2 and click on the blue Next button again. For Step 3, we are going to have two scopes: email and name. And then again click on the blue Next button. After, click on Save. Next, click on Test and wait for it to finish enabling. Now, we'll need to open a new web tab and navigate to console.cloud.google.com. From here, click on the drop-down box labeled Select a Project in the top left-hand corner. You should see your recently created project. If it isn't showing up, make sure you have all selected, enabled. Once you locate the Home Assistant project, click on it. This should bring you to the view for the project. You can verify which project you are working on by the name in the top left-hand corner. Next, navigate to Credentials under APIs and Services. On the new page, click on Create Credentials at the top of the page and select Service Account on the drop-down. Enter the name of your choice under Service Account Name, making sure that it is something you can recognize. And then click on Create and Continue. On Step 2, click on the drop-down titled Select a Role and search for Service Accounts. Under Service Accounts, select Service Account Token Creator, and then click on Continue. After, click on Done. You should now be back on the Credentials page with the new account under Service Accounts. Click on the pencil icon next to it to edit it. On the page that opens, select the Keys tab at the top of the page. Next, select Create New Key from the drop-down. Then make sure JSON is selected and click on Create. A new private key will be created, and its file downloaded to your computer. You can click on Close for this dialog. Next, search for Home Graph API at the top of the page. On the Home Graph API product page, click on Enable. It's now time to go to the Home Assistant dashboard. Here we'll be editing our configuration file and creating a new file. We'll need to add in the Google Assistant configuration. I'll have the text in the description below to copy. Just make sure to put your project ID in. The report state line enables activity reporting of exposed entity state to Google Home. Make sure to save the changes, and then we will need to create a new file matching the service account line. So we will call it service_account.json. The contents of this file will be everything copied from the service account file we downloaded earlier. You can open the file up in your favorite editor and paste the contents in, making sure to save the file once completed. Now let's check the validity of our configuration and restart Home Assistant. You can do this by first clicking on Developer Tools in the menu on the left, and then clicking on Check Configuration. If it comes back as good, you can click on Restart to restart Home Assistant. Once Home Assistant is finished restarting, we'll need to open up the Google Home app on our phone or tablet. From within the Google Home app, select Devices at the bottom and click on Add. On the new screen that opens, select Works with Google and search for your project name. I called mine Home Assistant. A new screen should appear asking if you want to link your Google account to Home Assistant on any device. Click on Continue. You should then be provided a Home Assistant login. Here you will enter in your username and password for local Home Assistant login. A few moments after logging in, you should be brought back to the Add a New Device page within the Google Home app. After waiting a few more seconds, you should be presented with a new screen for assigning devices to rooms. Going back into Home Assistant, we'll now see the Google Assistant integration listed under Devices and Services. From within the service, you can sync devices, which can be helpful if you recently added new devices to Home Assistant and they are not showing up in Google Home. You can also issue the voice command Sync Devices to your Google Home, which will refresh the devices it knows about. And with that, we've set up Google Assistant integration with Home Assistant for if you have Home Assistant exposed to the internet without needing the Nabu Casa cloud.
Turn on the garage light.
Alright, turning on the garage lights.
You're also able to limit which entities and domains are allowed to be exposed to Google Home. This can be completed manually by updating your configuration.yaml file. Likewise, if you want to interact with devices that are considered secure devices, such as locks or alarm panels, you will need to set the Secure Devices pin within your configuration file as well. Just remember to restart Home Assistant for those changes to take effect. So we can now control Home Assistant connected devices with our voice through Google Home. But let's crank things up a notch by adding our Google Home devices into Home Assistant as media players. Doing so will allow us to add them to a Home Assistant dashboard as a card, which will show what's currently playing on them and allow for control of that device. In addition to that, we'll be able to take advantage of text-to-speech to have Google Home say whatever we want as part of a home automation rule. As long as your Google Cast devices can be auto-discovered by Home Assistant, it will automatically show up as discovered, and you can set it up right away. If not, you'll have to go through a few manual steps for configuration. For both automatic and manual configuration, navigate to Devices and Services under Settings. If your devices have automatically been detected, you should see Google Cast under Discovered. If not, click on Add Integration and select Google Cast from the list. You'll need to add in the IP addresses of your Google Home devices with a comma between each one to be added. If your devices were automatically detected, you can click on Configure under the Cast service. With either manual configuration or automatic discovery, you should be presented with a list of your Google Home devices that you can then assign to Home Assistant areas. After clicking on Finish, you can navigate to the Cast devices to see all of the discovered Google Cast devices. Opening up one of the Google Home devices should give you a power button under Controls. Clicking it will turn on the media player from Home Assistant. If you're still using the default overview dashboard without any changes, then all of your Google Home devices will be added to that dashboard automatically. If you aren't using that included dashboard, you'll have to manually add the Google Home devices to it. To add a card for a Google Home device, simply click on the three-dot menu at the top of the screen of the dashboard you want to add to and click on Edit Dashboard. Next, click on the Add Card button and scroll down until you find the Media Control card. Select the device you want under Entity, apply any theme you might be using, and click on Save. I think I'll put my office display right in the middle of my dashboard, but you can obviously place it wherever you want. Once you're all set, make sure to click on Done. With the Media Control card, you can turn on the default media player, see what's playing on the device, control whatever is playing on the device, and send media to the device to be played. Take note that if you're running Home Assistant in a container, you'll need to have the container set to host network mode. Failure to do so will cause the integration to not be able to discover your Cast devices and is not supported by the Home Assistant project. Let's now take a look at making Google Home speak through a basic home automation rule. For this rule, I'm going to have Google announce that a front window has been opened when either my living room, left, or right window are opened. We'll first navigate to our file editor and make sure that our configuration.yaml file has the Google Translate platform configured. It should look like this. If you don't have it, add it in, save your configuration file, and restart Home Assistant. Next, navigate to Automations and Scenes under Settings and click on Create Automation. Click on Create Automation on the window that opens up, and then click on Add Trigger. On the drop-down that opens, select State. Next, under Entity, we are going to search for and select the entity for the left window contact sensor. Then we will click on 2, which will give us a drop-down of the different states possible for the entity, and we will select Open. We can go ahead and minimize the trigger by clicking on the arrow. After, we are going to click on Add Trigger, and again select State. This time, we will select the entity for the right living room window contact sensor, and again change the To field to Open. Next, we will click on Add Action and select Call Service. Under Service, search for text. As you can see, I have a few different text-to-speech options. One is for Cloud, which is using Home Assistant Cloud. Another is with Google Translate, and the last is just called Speak. For this automation, we will be using the Google Translate option. Next, we will need to select the entity, which for me will be Office Display. After, we can enter in the message we want to be spoken right under the entity. I'm going to enable caching of this message as I assume this will be spoken a lot. If you want to have this message sent to multiple speakers at once, under the same trigger, you can simply add more actions under the first one with the same Google Translate service. Next, click on Save and give your automation a name. Now that we created a new automation and saved it, let's test it out.
The front window has been opened.
Great, the automation works as expected. While you don't need to have Home Assistant remotely accessible to be able to set up Google Cast integration or to see the media control card for Google Home devices, Home Assistant does need to be available remotely over HTTPS to push media that is played or displayed on a Google Home. This includes the Home Assistant enhancement for Google Cast, which is called Home Assistant Cast. Home Assistant Cast allows for you to display your Home Assistant dashboards right on Cast devices with screens, which can even be interacted with. This casting of Home Assistant dashboards can be done manually from Home Assistant or as part of an automation. To manually display a dashboard, click on the Display Media button on the Media Control card for a Google Home device with a screen and select Dashboards. Next, click on the dashboard you want to have displayed. If your dashboard has multiple pages, you can select which page is displayed. Selecting the dashboard will cast it to the Google Home screen. On the Google Home device, you're able to interact with the dashboard, including scrolling and interacting with entities on the dashboard. Take note that while casting and scrolling of dashboards will work on a TV, you're not able to interact with entities, such as turning lights on or off. To stop the casting, you can swipe it away or click on the power icon for the device's media control card. Let's now set up an automation that will cast my Home Assistant dashboard to my Office Google Home Hub when I enter the room. To get started, open Automations and Scenes under Settings. Next, click on Create Automation and select Create New Automation on the pop-up. We'll first click on Add Trigger and then select Device. For this automation, I'm going to select my presence sensor, and for the trigger, I'm going to select Occupancy Became Occupied. Next, we will click on Add Action and select Play Media. For this automation, I'm going to select my Office Google Home Hub and then click on Pick Media. The pop-up window should look familiar from casting manually, and we'll be clicking on Dashboards. I'll be selecting my home dashboard and one of the views. Once all set, we can click on Save and give the automation a name. With what we have set up, when my presence sensor changes to occupied, a Home Assistant dashboard will be displayed on my Home Hub. But I also want it to clear the dashboard when I leave the office, so the screen can go to sleep. So let's add a second automation. We'll again add a device trigger, and it will be my presence sensor again. For the trigger, instead of becoming occupied, we'll change it to not occupied. For this action, we want to stop Home Assistant from casting. So this time, we are actually going to select Call Service and search for Media Player Turn Off. After selecting Media Player Turn Off, click on the blue button titled Choose Device, and I will be selecting my Home Office Hub. When ready, you can save the automation and give it a name. Now that we have two automations, one to cast our Home Assistant dashboard to a Google Home when we enter a room, and one to stop casting when we leave the room, let's test them both out. As expected, both automations work perfectly. I have a few ideas for how to use casting and automations, and I'd love to know what yours are, so make sure to let the community know in the comments below. One thing to keep in mind is that when you have a Google Home speak or cast an image while media is playing, the media will be stopped and not resumed.
A disaster recovery requires even more discs.
Don't forget to like this video, smiley face.
There are a few different ways to get around this issue, and I will be going over one of them with our third and final Google Home and Home Assistant integration. A newer addition to Google Home capabilities in Home Assistant is the Google Assistant SDK integration. The Google Assistant SDK integration allows Home Assistant to interact with Google Assistant. This includes sending text commands to Google Assistant to control devices connected to Google Home, but not Home Assistant, broadcasting messages to Google Home speakers and displays without interrupting media playback, and playing Google Assistant audio responses for any query on a media player. To set up Google Assistant SDK, first navigate to Devices and Services under Settings, or if you're on desktop, you can click on C on your keyboard and then search for integrations. Next, click on Add Integration and then search for and select Google. Under the Google branch, select Google Assistant SDK. Keep it in mind that there is a regular Google Assistant, so make sure you select Google Assistant SDK. A pop-up will appear asking for you to add credentials. If you have the Nest or Google Sheets integration set up already, you can reuse those credentials. Otherwise, you'll have to create new ones. In either case, click on the Credentials link under Step 1. A new tab should open up to the Google Cloud Console. If you aren't already logged into your Google account, you'll be required to do so. If you followed along setting up Google Home integration without Nabu Casa Cloud, you should already have a project created and selected, which you can verify in the top left-hand corner. If you haven't set up that integration, or use Home Assistant Cloud, you'll need to create a new project by clicking on Create Project, and giving the project a meaningful name. If you already have credentials set up from a previous integration, you can grab the client ID and secret from here and skip ahead. Otherwise, you'll need to continue with the following steps. From the Credentials section, click on Configure Consent screen. Next, select External and click on Create. On the new page, click on the drop-down menu under User Support Email and select the email address listed. After, scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter in your email once more under Developer Contact Information. Your email will not be shown to anyone on the internet. Once done, click on Save and Continue. On the new page, you can click on Save and Continue again, which you can do one more time on Step 3 as well. After, scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on Back to Dashboard. From here, click on Publish App and click on Confirm on the new pop-up. Next, click on Credentials in the left-hand menu. After, click on Create Credentials at the top of the screen and select OAuth Client ID. Under Application Type, select Web Application and give it a meaningful name. Next, click on Add URI under Authorized Redirect URIs. Here you will enter in https://my.home-assistant.io/redirect/OAuth. Once done, click on Create. This creation process should be pretty quick, but can take up to 5 minutes. Once the client has been created, you can copy the client ID and client secret from the screen and paste them in on the Home Assistant integration page. Don't forget to give the credential within Home Assistant a meaningful name. Once all 3 fields are filled in on Home Assistant, click on Add. A new tab will open asking you to log into your Google account. Make sure that it is the same account you used for the Google Cloud Console to create the credentials. After logging in, you'll be asked to confirm you want to allow Home Assistant to access your Google account. Click on Continue. You'll then be asked if you want to link your account to Home Assistant. Click on Link Account. Afterwards, you should see a success pop-up on Home Assistant. To finish setup of this integration, we actually need to go back to the Cloud Console, and in the search bar at the top of the page, search for and select Google Assistant API. Next, click on Enable. Going back to Home Assistant, you should now see the Google Assistant SDK integration being listed. Unlike the Google Cast integration, we won't be adding any devices. Instead, everything we just did was to set up a new service that we can now utilize. Let's first take a look at what we can actually do before creating a couple of example automations. To do this, click on Developer Tools and select the Services tab. Under the Services dropdown, search for SDK, which should give you 2 Google Assistant SDK options: Send Text Command and Send a Notification. While you can accomplish the same task as the Send a Notification option under the Send Text Command option, let's take a look at both. Under Message, you can put what text you want to be spoken through Google Home. If you call the service just like this, then a broadcast message to all of the Google Home devices in your household will get the message. If you want to have the broadcast sent to only one device, you can put the device name under Target. Title and data are not required for this to work. To test things out, click on Call Service. A broadcast should be heard shortly on your Google Home device or devices, depending on your settings.
Incoming broadcast. It says, test.
Taking a look at the Send Text Command service, we only have 2 fields, Command and Media Player Entity. Command is the voice command you would normally say to Google after its wake phrase is said. For example, if you want to turn on your light, you'd say, turn on the light. And that is exactly what you would type under Command. Entity is what device would provide an audible response if there is one. For example, if you type the command, what is the weather for today, you should put in which speaker you want the response to be played on. So let's have the answer to what is 1 + 1 sent to my office speaker. In the command field, we'll type in what is 1 + 1. In the entity field, we will select the office display. Clicking on Call Service should provide us with the answer to such a difficult question.
1 + 1 is 2.
To mimic the Send a Notification service, you can use the command broadcast followed by the message you want to send. If you want to send it to a specific speaker, you would use the command broadcast to speaker name followed by the message. And what's great is with either service, having the broadcast message sent to a Google Home device playing media will only pause the media for a few moments to say the message and then resume playing the media without requiring any extra steps.
The internet's the real vacuums. Diodes and relays shoot for the moon.
Incoming broadcast. It says, test.
My sister Zach Deniak. Back in the 50s, before they had help, my AI deceived even Turing himself.
Let's now go over creating a couple automations using both the send text command and send a notification services. The first automation will be to turn on my office lights, which are not in Home Assistant currently, when I enter in my office. For the trigger, I'm going to select my office presence sensor and set the trigger to occupancy becomes occupied. For action, we are going to select call service and search for Google Assistant SDK send text command. The options here should look pretty familiar from when we were testing out manually calling the service. For me, I'm going to type out turn on the office light. And because I don't care about getting an audible notification anywhere, I'm going to leave the entity field blank. To test out if this is going to do what we want, you can click on the three-dot menu and select Run for the action. Once you're all set, click on Save and give the automation a name. The next automation will be to have an audible notification sent when my front window is opened, but this time using a broadcast so that way media playback is not stopped. For this automation, I'm going to select State and choose the front window contact sensor changing to open. For the action, we will select Call Service, and this time we will select the Google Assistant SDK Send a Notification Service. Under Message, I'm going to enter in my notification of the front window being opened. And under Target, I'm going to put my Office Google Home device. Once all set, you can save and give the automation a name.
Incoming broadcast. It says, the living room window has been opened.
To be able to indirectly add a Google Home connected device into Home Assistant, we are first going to create a virtual button. To do this, go to Devices and Services under Settings and click on the Helpers tab. Next, click on Create Helper and select Button. Give it a name and click on Create. After, navigate to Automations and Scenes under Settings and create a new automation. For the trigger of this automation, we are going to pick State, and for the entity, we will select the virtual button we just created. For the trigger, we will set the To field to any state, which means if the button changes to any state, it will trigger. For the action, we will choose Call Service and then search for and select Google Assistant SDK Send Text Command. Under Command, I'm going to type in Turn on the office lights. And because I don't want an acknowledgement, I'm going to leave Entity blank. Once all set, save the automation and give it a name. We'll now quickly add the virtual button to our dashboard and try it out. Great, clicking on the button turns on the lights as expected, even though Home Assistant does not actually have the office lights as a device currently. You could take this a bit further by using a toggle for things like lights, but keep in mind, Google Home does not report the state of a device back to Home Assistant. Because of this, it could be pretty easy for the toggle to lose its track state. I'd love to know what automations you use or plan to use your Google Home integrations for, so let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, as it helps YouTube know that my video is great and that I'm awesome. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, as it helps signal to YouTube that it should be shared with others. I recommend checking out my video right here. In it, I go over how you can use your smart home to help make life easier, save time, and maybe even save a little bit of money with the help of home automation. And if you aren't already, consider subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications to be one of the first to know when I release other smart home related videos just like this one. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy automating.